Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Jazakallah khair for having me. I am from Sheffield. It's great to always be here. As much as I am in Sheffield, I'm also everywhere else. But this is my hometown, and I am so grateful for all of you to put this together and to organize it. I know the challenges on the university, and in particular the campus scene, have been definitely there over the years. So this is a breakthrough. So well done to all of you for putting this together, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase you, Insha'Allah. It was beautiful to listen to Sheikh Suhail talk about the concept of Ummah, and I just wanted to add that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places you exactly where He wants you. And in your journey, in this short lifespan that we have, and in our connectivity to the Ummah, you will also find yourself in phases, right? And those phases are very, very important, because each phase will require something different from you, but something very important that contributes to the mission and contributes to the collectiveness of the Ummah. So I think that's an important point to note, because at this given moment in time, you are all students on campus. And so your role as students is within this space. You have influence within this space. You have power as students that perhaps you may not have as you move through the phases of life, and as you move into other areas beyond university. So the title of my presentation today is Standing Firm, and exposing the roots and the reach of Islamophobia and dismantling it. Huge topic and area in itself. But what I want to talk about today specifically is not just the symptomatic aspects or elements of Islamophobia. I want to focus on the structural aspects. I want to focus on the institutional aspects. And this is something that Cage International, the organization that I work with, has focused on. We've been operating for over 2 decades, and we see Islamophobia as an industry. We see it as an oppressive, as part of an oppressive structure and system. And so today I want to zoom out and look at Islamophobia within that context. But before I do that, I just wanted to get a show of hands in terms of how many of you are familiar with Cage International and the work that we do. Okay, thank you. So I think I will just briefly give you a bit of insight for those of you that are not aware. So Cage initially started as Cage Prisoners, and it was an organization that was created post 9/11 at a time where fear really debilitated the community, and people were afraid to speak up. And at that time, we weren't Cage International, we were Cage Prisoners. And the catalyst for our work at that time was Guantanamo Bay. We started to collect the names and profiles of individuals that were being held in Guantanamo Bay. And that is still an ongoing issue. There are still brothers held there. 23, 24 years on, we're still, campaigning for the release of some of those men. But that was the beginning of our work. And as time went on, we realized that actually this isn't just about Guantanamo. What we're dealing with here is an entire infrastructure and matrix. It's the war on terror. And so what you see is the Guantanamoization everywhere. You've got political prisoners. You've got people being labeled terrorists. You've got the media constantly churning out narrative after narrative after narrative that criminalizes, that dehumanizes, that manufactures consent for wars. And so we realized that we have to now start to address this at a bigger level. And we started to focus on legislation and policy, and we rebranded from Cage, Prisoners to Cage. And more recently, we rebranded again from Cage to Cage International. Now, there's always been an international element and aspect to our work, but the rebranding was necessary because we're now in a position where you've got a global system and a global architecture that's been propped up that uses the same logic or so-called logic and reasoning and jargon to justify barbarity, brutality, the incarceration of Muslims, the lynching of Muslims, occupation and apartheid. And so whether you look at it in East Turkestan, whether you look at it in Palestine, whether you look at it in India, whether you look at it in Burma, you'll see the similarities and the synergy that sits between the rhetoric. So we're now in a position where we rebranded again from Cage to Cage International, and this is where we are. I'll stop there. I'll go into my presentation, but if anybody has any further questions afterwards, I'd be more than happy to have a chat with you guys. So I think that history is important because when we talk about the war on terror as a system, as a propped up architecture, it wasn't by accident that this has happened. It's not a misunderstanding. It's built deliberately through legislation, like the Terrorism Act 2000. It's funded deliberately. Billions are poured into policing and surveillance, and it's enforced deliberately every day in our airports, on our campuses, and in our communities. So what I want you guys to think about today is this system, to try and understand its roots, its machinery, and its very specific targets, right? Because to dismantle it, we have to understand it in all its forms of structural violence. So if it isn't just hate crime, what is it? It's infrastructure, right? Just as roads have highways and railways, and they're the physical infrastructure of a country, this is political and security infrastructure of the war on terror. And it's the hardware and software of control. So let's be more specific. What I'm saying is it's the laws. It's Schedule 7 stops at the airport, when you're detained for hours at a border for no reason other than being Muslim. It's the regimes. It's mass surveillance. It's the programs that hover up our communications. And centrally, it's the counter-extremism system, the matrix, a sprawling bureaucracy whose purpose is solely to monitor and reshape Muslim political identity. And at Cage, we've consistently argued that the ultimate goal of this infrastructure is to discipline Muslims into silence, to discipline them into apathy, to make us afraid to speak out, to pray, to organize, and to force us into a state of assimilation that demands that we renounce our politics and our faith in the public square. And this modern architecture finds, again, its blueprint in the war on terror. And that's why it's so important that we understand this. The war on terror is the engine that drives this entire system. It provides the pretext, the funding, as I said, and the political will. It normalized the unthinkable. It made mass surveillance acceptable. It's expanded policing and investigating crime to monitoring everyday life and what we call pre-crime. It's criminalized basic Islamic practice, from charity to certain religious texts and books, and systematically prescribed any form of legitimate resistance. It's reframed an entire global community, and this is such an important point. We're no longer citizens with rights. We are suspect communities. Our acceptance is conditional, contingent on our willingness to comply with our surveillance. And this is why our response, it can't be reform. You can't reform a system that was designed from its foundation to be oppressive. You just can't. The only ethical and logical and practical response is abolition, is to dismantle the pillars and the structures and to challenge them at their core, at the root. So let's be concrete. When we say it's a Schedule 7 stop, it's a form of administrative detention at the border. It requires no suspicion. It's based on racial profiling. It's a direct legacy of colonial-era emergency powers, used almost exclusively against Muslims, travelers from Muslim countries, Western countries, and activists. It is the prevent duty, which has turned our schools and our universities into frontline surveillance outposts. It mirrors the counterinsurgency tactics that are used by occupying armies to turn teachers into informants. And that is exactly what it is and what it does. And this isn't new. It's the logic of colonialism repackaged. It's the British Empire has used similar strategies in Ireland, criminalizing the Gaelic language and the Catholic education to break cultural resistance. And they used it in South Africa, designing the Bantu education system. In the words of Hendrik Ward, to teach the natives that equality with Europeans is not for them. The goal is the same, to discipline the subject population into compliance. But our response is rooted in a different tradition, one that is dignified, and one that does not compromise, and one that challenges. Because this is a pattern that is repeated throughout the prophetic guidance, throughout the Sunnah, and I think Sheikh Sahil touched on this very beautifully. The war on terror didn't create prejudice, but it did weaponize it into a global security paradigm. And we need to understand that. It provided the pretext for a permanent state of exception, and that is not okay. It is not okay at the expense of our children, at the expense of our families, at the expense of our lives. And this is a playbook that we've seen before. We've seen it during the civil rights movement in the US, the FBI's COINTELPRO program. It didn't just investigate crime. It sought to disrupt, to misdirect, to discredit, and to neutralize political organizations like the Black Panthers and Martin Luther King. But the goal was to prevent the rise of black power. That is what the goal of COINTELPRO was. And today, Prevent does the same. Its goal is to prevent the rise of a confident, politically organized Muslim community. So it normalized the unthinkable, it's made mass surveillance acceptable, it's expanded policing, and it's criminalized basic Islamic practice, thought, and activism. And you are seeing that play out on a daily basis now as we speak. When we look at this, sometimes it can be quite dark, right? And it feels like, how on earth are we supposed to challenge this? I don't want you to go away with this. I'm going into this because I want us to try and comprehend what we're dealing with, but also place ourselves within this context. So I want to zoom into one of the most pernicious parts of this infrastructure, and that's the counter-extremism aspect, specifically PREVENT and CVE. How many of you are familiar with PREVENT? Okay, got a fair few, alhamdulillah. So it's important that we understand this because as students, and particularly students on campus, this matters. Like this, having an understanding of the ways in which the policies impact you, the spaces that you're in, the spaces that you operate in, will help you navigate better. So for those of you that are not aware, PREVENT is a policy. It sits under the counter-extremism, within the counter-extremism space. PREVENT institutionalized Islamophobia. So PREVENT is about preventing terrorism. And they have certain markers. So you can go away and have a look at those. I think it's, you will find it very interesting, the markers for radicalization and extremism. I mean, if you compare it to a child that is going through puberty, it's almost like all of these kids need to be put through to PREVENT. But it's important to understand it again because the way it operates is it requires social workers and psychologists and doctors and teachers and lecturers to spot signs of radicalization and report them. So it moves and it pushes people that are supposed to be serving within these institutions and fulfilling a role into this space of policing. So that is what PREVENT is. And we're often told that it's about safeguarding and preventing violence. But the evidence is there that this is a lie. It's a toxic policy paradigm, and it's actually failed on its own terms, right? It hasn't stopped any violence. It's succeeded in its true function, actually, that it's there for ideological policing. It turns educators and doctors into frontline spies. It's forced to report on the thoughts and politics of those they serve, and it explicitly targets non-violent dissent and Islamic identity. It pathologizes a Muslim student's interest in politics, in Palestine, in justice, as a sign of radicalization. And so what this does is it creates a culture of fear and silence on campus. And it teaches a generation that to be a politically conscious Muslim is to be a problem. And this is not a side effect, it's by design. It's the system is structurally Islamophobic. And this is why we say that reform is not the answer. To tweak it is not the answer. We need an abolishment of the system, of the counter-extremism architecture, of the laws, of the policies that target us in this way. And it's important for us to question, why are campuses such a key battleground? And I'm going to use this word battleground deliberately because at the moment we've seen students being dismissed across the board. And there are many, many cases. There have actually been cases here in Sheffield, at Sheffield University. And the reason why the campuses are a battleground is because they are sites of power. They are where consciousness is raised, where movements are born. And if you look at the apartheid in South Africa, the state knew, and that's why they targeted Steve Biko and the SASO leaders on campus. The British state knew this during the Troubles when they infiltrated student unions. And today, it's the same. The PREVENT duty is designed to ensure that critical political thought is, especially when it comes to Palestine, is pathologized and it's reported. Campuses are targeted precisely because of that, because they have power. And this is where political consciousness is formed, where collective action is organized, where state narratives are challenged and dismantled. And the state knows this. Therefore, campuses have become laboratories for the counter-extremism agenda. And I think ISOCs across the board can share experiences over the years, and they do, and I deal with multiple challenges every time we try to organize events. And, you know, they have issues when it comes to the bureaucracy. You know, it's so arduous, but it's targeted. We can't reform this. We have to defund, we have to dismantle, and we have to challenge. And we shouldn't be afraid to do that, because you have the power and you have the rights to do that. In its place, we have to hold our spaces independently. In our communities, we want community-led safety from state harassment, from racist policies, and from the violence of suspicion. Abolition is something that we hear often, right? Abolition begins not with a protest sign. It begins with a vision. And we have to dare to envision a world after and beyond securitization. Imagine a university where a student can organize a talk, and it's on Palestine, and we're living in a time where there's a real-time genocide happening. You're trying to organize a talk, and you don't face the issues that you do. It's welcome that you're organizing. You're not having to go through the bureaucracy of having to answer 1 million questions and jump through 1 million loopholes just to bring in a speaker that can speak to an audience and say, killing children is not okay. Like, imagine that. Imagine, you know, a world without Schedule 7 where you don't have secret terror lists. You don't have, you know, fear every time you're having to go and travel through the airport that you might get stopped. You might get interrogated. You might get questioned on your political views and where do you pray? How many times do you pray? What are your thoughts on Palestine? Abolition sometimes is seen as something that is, you know, a bit too radical and a bit too violent. It is radical. And being radical is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. It's about tearing down oppressive systems. And it begins with the positive act, the act of imagination, that we refuse and we reject to be a part of the infrastructure and the structures and the institutions that bring harm to us and our communities and our people. It's not a utopian fantasy, it's a political necessity. And if we can't imagine a world without these systems of control, we're never going to be able to build it. So our imagination is actually the first site of our resistance. And when we say students have always been the front line, we mean the children of Soweto in 1976. They weren't waiting for permission. They organized themselves against a system that designed to crush their spirit. They marched against a law that dictated how they could learn. Just as we must resist a policy, prevent, that dictates what are we allowed to think. The state met their books with bullets, and in doing so, it exposed its own brutality. So resistance isn't just about marches, it's about building a new consciousness. Steve Biko and the students in South Africa, they did this. They knew this, and they built a movement that was focused on psychological liberation, on telling their people that you can be free, and free in their minds, even whilst they were in chains. And this is our task today, to dismantle the internalized fear that we have, that structural Islamophobia breeds, and to build from the ground up an unshakable belief in our own dignity and our right to political agency. And so, a final note, what is our role in this? Our role in this is that we can't be passive. We're not victims, just victims of a system. We are and have always been agents of change. We're builders, organizers, truth tellers, activists, leaders. And standing firm means arming yourself with knowledge. It means not accepting, but challenging and working towards dismantling the false narratives of safeguarding. It means rejecting the very logic of surveillance in our unions, our societies, our classrooms, our lecture theatres. It means defending political speech, especially for Palestine in this time, which is now the primary target of this apparatus. It means organising not for reform, but for abolition. It means refusing to normalise injustice, refusing to accept that this is just the way things are. No. Things should not be like this. So from the civil rights movement to the anti-apartheid struggle, students have always been the conscience and the catalyst. And this time that we're in now, it's no different. It's actually a very crucial time. And you, all of you, are part of that lineage. You're part of that ongoing legacy. You're the Soweto students marching against the language of oppression. You're the Birmingham children facing fire hoses and dogs for their dignity. You are the Bobby Sands and the H-Block prisoners, using their very bodies as instruments of resistance against criminalization. And you're the companions of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the best of examples, the leader of leaders. Standing firm means using every tool that we have. It means having the courage to stand up, to speak, to sacrifice. It means organising. Organise Know Your Rights workshops. Raise awareness. Tell your story in your own words. Don't let other people tell your story for you. Own the narrative. Claim the narrative. Reclaim the narrative. Build autonomous, community-led support systems so no one has to rely on the institutions that are designed to harm us. There's no bigger strength than faith-led activism. And I'll end on a quote, take some questions. One of my favorite quotes is that when your fear touches somebody's pain, it becomes pity. But when your love touches somebody's pain, it becomes compassion. The Prophet ﷺ led with compassion. Today, we see so much pain around us. We see so much that is difficult on the heart. It's difficult for the soul, right? And I like this quote because I always go back to it because I think, am I interacting with this information and this witnessing through a prism of fear? Right? Because if I am, then I need to change that because that's not who we are. But if you're interacting with it through a prism of love, then it's an act, it's a connection, it's a transaction that will lead you to action. Because the Prophet ﷺ moved and acted with compassion, and that compassion compelled him to act. It didn't destabilize him. It didn't debilitate him. It led him to action. It led him to justice. And that is where we want to be, Insha'Allah. Jazakallah khair.